So let's begin. We'll open the meeting where the committee of the whole is now in session. First item we have is the 2020-21 budget. So Brian?
I'm sorry, Andy, can you allow me to share my screen?
I think he's on it.
Okay, go ahead.
Yep. All right, can everybody see that?
We do here.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So this year is a pretty unprecedented year as far as the budget. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I think this is the first time I've seen this much uncertainty as we go into this budget cycle. And right now, as we're just starting to digest the impact of the pandemic and its effect on the economy, there's more questions than answers. So we felt tonight that our best approach is to try to quantify the best and worst case scenario in the budget and present that to you so that at least that's a starting point. Tonight, we're not going to be making any recommendations as far as tax increases or budget cuts or anything of that nature. We just want to start out with this basic best case, worst case scenario for you. The next month then really will be focused on working with PFM and the Department of Ed in the absence of Mr. Zogby to really take a look at what these scenarios look like and how they affect the projections. And we're hoping that by the May meeting, then we'll be able to bring you back those projections with different scenarios in them and hopefully several options to balance the budget in June. We're also hoping by that point we'll have more information about, again, the overall impact on the economy and maybe a direction on where the state's going with their budget because they're impacted because of this just as much as we are. So just to get started, right now I think the big question for us is, not whether or not we're going to have a recession, but how long that recession will be and how deep it'll be. And right now I just shared some of the research that I've been looking at. There's really a couple different scenarios the economists are looking at. The first one is more of a V-shaped depression or recession where we bounce down into recession and then bounce back out just as quickly as we came in. I think that seemed a little more likely about a month ago. Now that's looking like it's not going to be as likely, and this may last a little bit longer. The next one is an L shape. That's the worst type, and that's closer to what we saw with the Great Depression, where we dip into recession and it takes years to come out of it. And then the last one, and it seems to be the one most economists are settling on right now, is the U shape, where we retract, we're down for a while, and then we come back out, hopefully in 18 to 24 months. So for us, trying to build a framework around these scenarios, we decided to look at the 2008 recession because we felt that was the closest comparison that we had. So on the revenue side, really we looked at our real estate taxes, our earned income tax, real estate transfer, and local service tax, and looked at what happened to those revenues back in 2008 and when we had that recession. And you can see here on the best case scenario, we'll start there. We would be looking at really not much of an impact, where the 1920 estimate is basically, the 2021 estimate is based on 1920 actual collections adjusted for some of those pilots. The worst case scenario, and this is really what happened back in the 2008 recession, was about a 4% drop in real estate tax collections for that first year or two. Now, just keep in mind with the real estate taxes, that would be a temporary reduction in collections because as it works through the delinquent cycle, we would see an increase in delinquent taxes as those work through that process. And then the middle is always going to be somewhere right in the middle of the best and worst case scenarios. On the earned income tax, real estate transfer, and local service tax, those are all our other local taxes. We really looked at those collectively, and the best case scenario started out again with the 1920 estimates. The worst case scenario, again, looking back to 2008, we saw a $1.3 million dip in collections of those revenues. So that's the worst case there. And then the real question right now is how this is all going to affect the state budget, because that's the biggest portion of our revenue budget. And again, we tried to look a little bit at what happened back in 2008, and I have an example here. I didn't have the details for Erie School District because I was at Northeast at that time, but this kind of gives you an idea of what happened back then. This is what happened with the basic ed subsidy, and you can see there was a history there of increases, about 2% increases through 2008, 2009. And then when the recession hit, the state really dialed back its share of the basic ed subsidy and slotted in a couple rounds of stimulus funds. So some of those funds that were supposed to go directly to the school districts, they used that to supplant what they were doing with their basic ed subsidy and keep it artificially high. And then by 2010-11, when those funds ran out, they had to make an adjustment. So during that 4-year period, although there was some increases, overall, I think best case scenario for that period, and looking at what we're doing now, we're probably looking at level funding for the next couple of years. So we, for the best and worst case scenario, we took a look at the proposed state budget, what the governor proposed before everything started happening. That's the best case. We really do not think that is very likely at this point. And then the worst case is about a 4.5% decrease from there. So that gives a range. Again, this one, we're making our best guess at what we think might happen, but it's, I think, the most, the one that we have the most concern about accuracy. And then on the expense side, at this point, we're really not adjusting too many of expenses for the best and worst case scenario. We want to get a better handle on the revenue and the impact of what this is going to do to our long-term projections. But one concern that we do have is charter tuition. And there is a concern that if this continues, that we may see a number of families leaving for cyber charter schools. And just to give you an example of how that's happened in the past, I have our history here from 2014. And you can see there's two peak areas where people did leave for charter. And the first one was back in 2015 when we were in the middle of the budget crisis and started talking about closing all the high schools. And you can see that we did see a pretty immediate increase in our cyber charter enrollment as a result of that. And then the same thing happened during the reconfiguration. So for our scenarios tonight, our best case scenario is based on the financial improvement plan with 30 students leaving for charter overall. And then worst case is 120 students leaving. Now, with that being said, Eric and I have been talking at length about this for the last week and this concern. And certainly we want to get out in front of this, and as soon as we start planned instruction on the 20th, we're certainly going to make sure we get the word out to all our families that we have our own cyber program here in-house, and that's an option. So we're hoping that if families ultimately decide that they'd rather move to a cyber choice, that they choose our program instead of one of the cyber charter schools. So with that, before I turn to the 2020-2021 budget, I just wanted to do a quick overview of what we're projecting for 2019-20. And you can see for the 19-20 budget, we started off with a budgeted revenues of $204 million. We did end the year with $207 million in revenues, so about 2.5 million or 1.24% higher than what was budgeted. The big areas where we did see some additional revenues were real estate taxes, and under other taxes, the real estate transfer taxes. I think, both of those increases were signs that the economic turnaround that was happening in Erie before all this hit was really working, and we were starting to see some results for that. On the expense side, and before I look at the overall numbers, I do want to point out, if you look at the note at the bottom, if you recall, we ended the 2018-19 school year with a $12 million surplus, and we decided to use those funds to pay off the swap agreement and get out of that, and then also transfer some additional money into the capital projects fund. So even though we were using the 2018-19 surplus to do that, those expenses actually fell in 19-20 and were planned. So when you look at that, we did that after we had adopted the budget. So we were anticipating for this year, because of that, a $12 million deficit, which would have brought our fund balance down to $8 million, which is right where we wanted to keep it. Looking at the expenditures, you can see under debt service and other, that's $12 million higher than what was budgeted. That's those two items. But on the positive side, you can see under salaries and benefits, we did come in about $2 million under budget. That's a combination of salaries, and we did have a good year on our health insurance. And then overall in tuition, we were down about $500,000. So looking at that, again, we anticipated coming in with a $12 million deficit, and we ended the year with a 7.6. So overall, we ended up about $4.6 million better than what we anticipated. Before I go on to the 2021 budget, is there any questions on 19-20?
I do have a question, Mr. President.
Go ahead, Gwen.
I have a question. What is this line item? One says tuition, and who's that tuition for, and why? And then you have charter tuition.
So we break out charter tuition on this because it's one of the biggest line items in our budget. And so that's the charter tuition is what we pay our brick and mortar and cyber charter schools each year. The tuition is for some of the other programs that we don't have the services we can offer in-house. One of the biggest ones is the Barber Center. Again, most of that tends more towards special education, but we also have in there some court-placed tuition where a student gets assigned through the courts into other programs, and we're still responsible to provide that education. So whatever entity is providing education wherever they're sent would send us a tuition bill.
Okay, thank you. I just needed clarity on what was the two different tuitions.
Anyone else so far? Okay, Brian.
And this is just a summary, and for the new board members, I did send you, and it's also posted on our website, the budget book, which has all the detail for the budget, right down to the line item as you move back through that book. And again, I encourage you as we move through this process to please review that. Certainly, if you have any questions or concerns, please send those to me or Neil, and we'll try to address them as quickly as we can. So for the 2020-2021 budget, we have here as a comparison the 1920 estimate with ending the year with the $7.6 million deficit. But you can see here when we make the adjustments that I discussed in the previous slides, on the bottom line, you can see that the worst case scenario, we're looking at about a $9.5 million deficit. And then the best case scenario is a $1.3 million deficit. For the budget book, we decided to go with the middle, with the $5.2 million deficit. So as you review that book and that detail, that middle section there is what's going to be in that book. So again, we do have some pretty big challenges facing us for this upcoming budget cycle. And also, typically when last year when we did this budget and presented the preliminary budget, we would have included the 2.46% real estate tax increase that's called for under the financial improvement plan. I did not do that at this point because I really think given the circumstances, the economic impact on our community, that we need to really take a close look at all options before we decide that we would want to proceed with a tax increase. But just to put all of that in perspective, you can see if I would have included the 2.46% tax increase in the budget, that would have generated $1 million in additional revenue. And under the best case scenario, then we would effectively have been balanced. But again, we don't think that we're going to end up on the best case scenario. I think at this point, I'm feeling that probably we're going to be closer to the middle and we're going to have to make some adjustments in our budget and our plans. So with that, there is some good news to all this. I think, coming into this recession, we're in a much better position to address it than we were the last time. Again, one of the things that we have in the budget right now that was part of the financial improvement plan was the plan to transfer another $7.6 million to the capital projects fund. That's something that I think that we could probably take a look at in the short term for this year and maybe eliminate that or reduce that to balance our budget. So that there's something that we can look at to bridge those short-term losses. And then the other thing that we have that we didn't back in 2008 or through the entire financial crisis is a pretty solid fund balance at 12.6. So we have a board policy out there that we're striving to maintain a fund balance of $8 million. So again, looking at some of those options for recessions, if we're lucky enough and we have a V-type recession and we dip in and out, that would be a good use of that $4.6 million to really bridge that short-term loss that we would have in the revenue without having to cut any programming or anything out of the budget. And then the other thing that we're starting to see is the fund stimulus money coming through. Looking at this, we are scheduled to receive through the CARES Act probably about $6.8 million. It's allocated based on Title I funding. So again, that's a real positive. I have the list of eligible uses here. And you can see that most of it is geared towards preparing or responding to COVID-19. There's nothing in there that really says that we were able to use that to balance our budget. I'm hoping that we're going to get some more clarity on what we can and can't do with that very soon. But that may be another option in the short term, although I'm very hesitant to take some of these one-time type relief funds and use them for ongoing operations. That's what we did the last time around and got into some trouble doing that. So we're going to have to be very careful about that if we decide to utilize some of those funds for that. The other thing that we did receive this week and we're applying for is the PA's Continuity of Education Equity Grants. They allocated $5 million. They're competitive grants. We don't anticipate receiving a ton of money from that, because if you take that $5 million and spread it out all over all the entities in Pennsylvania that are eligible, it's about $16,000 per entity. But we are applying for that, and our focus right now is on internet access. So we really, want to try to use that. And again, I'm hoping with the CARES Act funding that we would be able to utilize that for internet access as well, and try to fix our connectivity and device issues with these funds, so that as we move through this crisis, and there's the chance that we're going to have rolling closures over the next 12 to 18 months while they develop a cure for it, that we would have all the equipment and technology in place to easily transition back to remote learning. And so the plan, again, this year is a little modified given the circumstances. Again, tonight we're presenting you what we feel at this point is the best, worst, and middle case scenarios. We're going to take the next month to really work closely with PFM and the department, and really try to wrap our arms around how this is going to impact us as a district for this budget cycle, as well as the next 5 years. I just listed some of the questions that I'm hoping I will be able to come back and answer for you that I don't have an answer for right now in May. One of the biggest ones is the tax increase. And if we decide to forgo that tax increase because of what's happening in our community, how will that affect future budgets, and what type of adjustments we'll have to make ensure our budget's balanced in the long term. The other one, as we look at some of those reserve accounts I pointed out earlier, we want to really quantify how long those will last, so we can identify how long we can continue to use those before thinking about making some adjustments to our budgets or our plans. Certainly the impact of the stimulus funds, what we can and can't do with those. And again, is the last case scenario, but probably likely, is that we're going to have to look, especially in the long term, at delaying or making some type of cuts to balance the budget. We're lucky that we do have 2 months, and again, things are moving very quickly. So again, by May, we should have more information on the overall impact and the impact on the budget. And certainly by June, I think we're going to have a solid handle on where the state's going and what they're thinking as far as our allocations for the 2020-21 school year. So that's all I have for the budget. Are there any questions?
Brian, you're certainly prudent and responsible to be dealing with all the scenarios, including the worst case. And I'm not advocating waiting and seeing, but certainly the uncertainty is universal statewide. And are we getting any guidance or indication about expectations from the state? I mean, certainly they'll have to take a responsibility to help all of the school districts to adapt to what's happening, and it's ever changing, and we're in flux, and we're I know you don't want to and can't assume that they'll help us, because there's a lot of assumptions we made. They should have helped us more than they did in other times. But anyway, just in a general way, do they give any guidance, like what's coming from them and when?
We haven't received anything yet. Again, I'm hoping, I think they're dealing with some bigger issues at this point, but I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks we'll start to see. But again, I think pointing back to 2008 and the impact it had on the state budget then, again, looking at the blue lines on basic ed on this slide and what happened and what the state was able to contribute during that recession. You can see from 2008-9 to 2010-11, there was a pretty significant drop in the state share. In the first time in history, I think that there was some type of federal share in that basic ed funding, but that overall drop was about 11% on the state side. So really, I think this is all going to be predicated on what type of stimulus funds they get at their level to stabilize their budget, and how far that'll go in helping to at least hopefully keep our revenue stream level throughout this crisis.
I know we can't hang our hat on it, but I like to believe that they're going to recognize as a governmental body that they've got a big problem and they'll respond differently than they did in 2010.
Yes, hopefully.
All right, well, that's just a general thought. Anyone, questions, comments for the budget of Brian?
Yes, Mr. President. It wouldn't appear that we're likely to reopen the schools this academic year, so it would seem to me that we should be considering some extensive layoffs in order to save the district some money, and the laid off people could take advantage of the generous federal benefits that are available at this time.
Attorney Wachter, would you like to address that in the school code bill that was passed?
Yes, absolutely. Act 13 of 2020, which is that Senate Bill 751 that was passed last week, does say that the school district is obligated to maintain employment and paying all of its personnel during the period of the COVID-19 shutdowns.
And under normal circumstances, if we did lay off a lot of people, we would still be contributing to the unemployment fund, wouldn't we?
Yes, we are self-insured. We did take a look at, before that came out, the overall impact on the district's budget. And I believe that we were looking at about a $200,000 variance between the overall cost of the unemployment and the salaries and benefits. But I do have that analysis. I may be wrong on that. I haven't looked at that in a couple of weeks and lots happened, but I'll get that out to the board as soon as I can.
Any more on this? If not, we can move on. The new business of the school district for tonight's agenda and/or the supplemental. Any questions or comments on that? Brian, back to that. I don't know when I asked you that question about what to expect from the state, I mean, certainly I would like to think if they can't provide us with their usual subsidies, that they have a means to adjust for that or respond to that with all of the school districts. Is that, is that,
I think that
go ahead.
What happened in 2008 is the closest thing we have to an idea of how they're going to respond right now. I don't know, other than that, what else we could look to. Certainly I hope that we would be able to maintain that balanced state subsidy throughout. But like us, I think they're still trying to grapple with the overall impact on their budget. And given that they're heavy with earned income tax and sales tax, and they're also going to have to pick up all the UC costs, unemployment costs for all the individuals that are unemployed. It's going to be a heavy lift for them to get through this, especially without any federal help. So I think, a lot of this will depend on what happens at the federal level.
Thank you.
Mr. I had a question.
Go ahead,
I just had a couple questions. So the first question would be, are we still going to be moving forward with our costs for the projects that we were doing for the construction? Now that our budget may be changing, are we still going to do like all those renovations? How will this affect that in any way? And then also, I know that we hate to think this way, but if this happens to drag out, past summer into the next school year, how would that affect our budget? And how, just say if this last into next school year and the students still doing Google classrooms and things like that, how that, you know, what kind of impact would that have on our budget as far as like the students not actually being in the class, or, you know, with, you know, not needing as much staff for, you know, cleaning the buildings or things like that, you know, just something to think about. But my number one question would be like, how is all of this gonna affect any of the renovations that we're doing?
So, you know, on one slide, I had that we could skip the transfer to the capital projects this year. Even if we skip that transfer this year, we still have enough funds to pay for phase one of the facilities plan, the $80.8 million. That we were hoping to use those funds to give us a little more cushion and a little more flexibility at Erie High at this point. But certainly we would still be able to continue with everything that we anticipated at this point. As far as, again, the long-term effect, I have more questions than answers on that, Angela. I really don't know what that's going to look like. Again, I'm hoping that as we work through this with PFM and receive more guidance from the state, that we'll be able to paint a better picture of the potential long-term impact and bring that to everybody in May.
Thank you.
If there isn't anything more on the budget for tonight, who's that?
That's all I have tonight.
Okay. Well, then, any items on the new business that are, any questions or comments on tonight's new business or supplemental?
I only have one question. Tim, are you at home?
He is.
I am,
So,
yes.
so do you always wear a suit and tie even when you're at home?
We dress for dinner.
Nice.
Mr. President,
When?
this letter that you received from a Gannon nursing student, are you going to address that?
Well, I handed that off to the administration and I forgot about it, to be honest with you. I would think with all that's happened, they aren't in session anymore. But that's not a dodge, Gwen. I forgot about it.
No, I understand, but I'm just saying, you know, they have a lot of free time on their hand, and depending on which direction we're going with the pandemic, when they release it, maybe we can look at trying to do a bicycle rodeo or utilizing some of our hometown celebrities who have played sports, elected officials or radio personalities, for them to understand the importance of helmets. You know, this is just something to look forward to. Everything can't be doom and gloom. Let's brighten up something. So look, you know, just food for thought idea. I understand it's very important. The kids are going to be out here regardless. So we need to also be on the front line of educating them about the safety of helmets.
Okay, Gwen, back when I got the letters, I just want to make sure that someone here responded to them. And so Brian, if you could jot down that when we get out of trouble, or it can be done, that's in the suggestion box.
Yeah, we will, as soon as we get instruction up and running here in the district, we will start getting to those type of things. So I have it on my list now, and we'll make sure we do address it.
Is there any other?
Mr. President?
Was that Rose?
Darlene.
Oh, I'm sorry, Darlene, go ahead.
So Brian, you had talked about how you and Eric felt it was pretty important that we get ahead of this charter school tuition issue, or charter issue, and charter school tuition issue. Are we going to start on that sooner than later, letting our parents and our families know that we do have our own our charter, cyber charter? I hate for us to wait too long and have these parents make decisions to opt out for another, you know, cyber, PA cyber, or whatever, one of those options. So do we have a plan in place for that? I know you've been very, very busy, but is that something we're going to launch sooner than later?
Yes, we'll start getting information out as soon as we shift over to planned instruction, for sure, because that's when we'll start to have enrollment opening back up. So once that happens, we'll make sure that we have that information out to parents and continue to offer that The other thing that we'll do, and we've been doing that this year with especially our cyber students, if somebody does enroll in one of those cyber charter programs, we're going to call them and we're going to ask them why, and we're going to see if there's anything we can do to convince them to come over to our program. Usually an easy sell, because we do have a better program with some more hands-on experiences than the cyber charters do.
Any other matter on anyone's mind before we would go to an executive session?
Mr. President, it's Tyler.
Tyler?
I guess just kind of, this was similar to what Ms. Feeney just said. I guess my concern would be is when we are pushing out this program, that we let them know how it's different than the online supplemental than what we're doing now. Because I think that, right now we're kind of in that scramble crisis phase that all districts across the nation are in, but that the online program is very, very different. And that I guess also, and this question I would have just in general, maybe we don't have an answer to, is how is the online program right now, how is that experience different or progressing versus what the students who just moved online, how's that different? How are the two separated?
Teresa, can I have you address that?
So Tyler, the kids that were on online before are using specific platforms that they've been using all year long. So the teachers are trained in it, the students are familiar with it, and we just weren't at that point with all of our students. So that's the difference. It's kind of, it's more of a design thing than anything. But that's something that we're looking at moving forward, as far as having students consider to stay with us for online instruction. So it's more of a charted path, so to speak.
Thank you. And I had suspected that was the answer. I just think it's really important that we all know that the online experience will be very different than the current online experience, and that this is a very intense response that I can't imagine having to undertake, and taking brick and mortars and turning them into an online experience in just a few weeks. This takes years to do, and that's why many people aren't able to do it, or many platforms aren't able to do it. And I just think it's really important for parents, for teachers, for staff, for all of us to know that what we are offering in the cyber school is very, very different than what they may be experiencing now, because I'm afraid that this may put a bad taste in their mouth and think that this is what it's always going to be like. And I just want to make that distinction.
Absolutely.
Mr. President.
Angela?
I got a question for you. I emailed like a list of questions, and I had sent Brian a text to let him know that I had like a list of questions. I know now is not the appropriate time to ask those questions. I was gonna ask them during our general meeting, but I wanted to ask you, at what point would I be able to ask? This is more like questions that are valid from the community and from myself as a parent. I just didn't know at what point during our the next meeting, during our general meeting at 6, should I ask these questions? Should I wait till the
Well, let's do it during that meeting, Angela. We might have more of an audience too. And if
I just didn't know what time, like what, I want it to be appropriate, like at what point I ask.
Okay, I appreciate that. Let me see. We could, I suppose we could do it, if no one objected, we could just have the something like that moved up to the beginning, or just call it committee reports for tonight, or when we get to that point, which is early. Or
Okay.
the superintendent gives his report before that, and if you have questions for the superintendent, I think that would be appropriate at that time.
I think if he allowed me to ask him, before the report, because then he might actually have some of the answers, and if he doesn't have the answers, at least he can write them down and give the answers during his report.
I'm just processing this as we're talking. Let's let him give his report, and then
Okay.
before we approve it, then I'll ask if anybody has any questions for the superintendent on anything.
Okay.
And then it becomes part of his report.
Yeah. Okay. That would be great.
Oh, that's early, Angela. That's the second item. So we'll let him give
Okay.
his report, and then any questions you or anybody else has, he'll field them, okay?
Okay, I appreciate it.
We have 20 minutes and we have an executive session, but I'll make one last call. Is there anything else you want to bring up here, anyone? Okay, we'll end this now and go to executive. So I would ask the board members and everybody else who would normally be in an executive session to just stay with us